I think the more time people can spend in their own head and just going to those uncomfortable places, the more they'll learn about themselves and what is going to give them more alignment in life.
You're now listening to the Let's Talk About Life podcast, brought to you by Don't Settle, with your host, Harrison King. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Let's Talk About Life podcast. My name is Harrison King, and I got a special guest here today, someone who I was just chatting with here, but we've never actually officially met. This is our first meeting, so we were getting it all recorded on camera with the audio, and I'll let her introduce herself. Stacey, go ahead.
Yeah, so my name is Stacey Shand. I am from and live in Saskatchewan, but I also spent some time in British Columbia for training purposes. And so in terms of training, how I like to spend my free time is completing sort of extreme endurance events and challenges that I set up for myself. Sometimes they're races, sometimes not. And yeah, that's a bit about me and why I'm here.
Yeah. So I again we haven't really chatted, but I've heard about these crazy things that you're up to, and I think it's phenomenal. Would you mind listing or getting into a couple of the things that you've done? Because I heard something about something in a desert. Is this true?
Yeah,
Did you do something in a desert, or you want to talk about that for a second?
Yes. So basically, any of the extremes is where you could kind of guess is where I ended up. So training in Saskatchewan, I got into running, and sort of from there, lots more physical activity like swimming and biking. And then I just got into doing long events in all of those sports. And so then, yeah, basically, as I progressed, I found that I just hit this like rhythm when I was over an hour into anything I was doing. So if I went for a run and was like running for like 5K, I'd usually be miserable that entire time.
Really?
But as soon as I got into like over an hour, then I just found this rhythm that I felt like I could stay in forever. And then that made me explore growing from there and seeing, okay, if I can, how long can I actually stay in that rhythm for? So then, of course, coming from Saskatchewan, I wanted to see how I could do in like extremely hot races. Right. So I went to Costa Rica and I did a race called the Route of Fire. And it was an ultramarathon that was over, it's like a stage race. So each day you do a race.
How many days?
That one was 6 days, I believe. And every day included a volcano. So it was extreme, and it was during Canadian winter, so it was like -40 in Saskatchewan, and it was like +37 in Costa Rica when I went to race there. So it was like these extremes. And then the next race I did after that was in the Arctic. So I went up past the Arctic Circle and did a race up there. So once again, I got those different extremes. Yeah. And then from there, I was encouraged, because running in snow is kind of like running through sand. Right. And I heard about this race that takes place across the Sahara Desert. And you have to run with all of your equipment to survive for 7 days. So all of your food, cooking equipment, everything is on your back as you are running across the Sahara.
Well, that must be like 50 pounds.
Well, you really honestly, it comes down to like having a spreadsheet where you weigh every single thing.
So you got to have nothing with you.
Yeah. And your minimum, I think the cutoff is 15 or 18 pounds, because they don't want people putting themselves in danger. Right. So you have to have a minimum. But I think mine was like 19 or 20 pounds.
That's a lot of weight though, right?
Yeah. After that long. And every day every time you eat a meal, you're so happy to take more weight out of your pack, because you're like, yes, I've used it. I've used something out of my pack. So I've done that. And then sort of a big race that I was really aiming to get into is called the Bad Water Ultramarathon. And it is in Death Valley, and it is held on the anniversary of the hottest day ever recorded on Earth, which was in Death Valley. And so not only is it insanely hot temperatures, so when I raced, it was like 56 degrees Celsius. So,
oh my gosh,
unreal temperatures. But you start on the lowest part of the United States, which was like 300 feet below sea level. And the race ends at the highest point in the lower continental United States, which is Mount Whitney. So you have this heat, but you also have this insane elevation gain. And this race, there's been so many documentaries on it, because there's people basically are running in like almost like white suits to protect their skin,
Right.
but they're running on the white line of the pavement because your shoes melt on the black asphalt.
Oh my
So
gosh.
you actually have to run on like the painted
Wow.
line because your shoes will last longer. And so that race was, I think I was the like 10th Canadian to ever take part in that race. It's really hard to get into, and you basically submit like a massive like resume of all the races and events and challenges you've done to get into this race. But every single race, there's something different about it. There's different challenges. It makes me test my limits in ways that I hadn't tested before.
For sure.
And so there's so much learning. One of the hardest questions I ever get is like, what's your favorite race? When you have, you just can't compare them.
Well, they're all
right?
so different.
Like,
For sure.
They're all so different. Yeah.
It's really interesting. The first thing you said, this is a little while ago, but you were saying about when you were kind of starting this, you were running, you said, or doing anything after like an hour. You're talking like physical activity, right?
Yes.
I assume. I'm wondering, people talk about being in a flow state or a state of flow, or whatever they call it. Would you say that that's what happens? Like once you've reached that kind of hour point, what do you think's the difference? Like what changes at that point?
So what I'm assuming from sort of a physiological aspect is that my lungs and heart and muscles have just found a nice like medium that they're not shocked from what just happened. They get into this sort of like rhythm where they're like, okay, this is what's happening and we are going to keep doing this.
Easier to keep going than stopping, right?
Exactly. Don't push too much further than this. Stay at this nice like rhythm and we can keep this going. Like I have just found that and it was training for my first marathon that I found that like that peace. And when I got to say about the 3-hour mark where so many people were hitting the wall, like you always hear people say you hit the wall, I was like, oh, I'm good. Like I can keep going. Like this is good.
And how did you find that? Because you're saying like you were miserable doing run, like even, I mean, obviously you're an exception, but when I hear from most people, nobody likes running, but everybody does it because it's good for you.
Yes.
But if you're like, well, I'm going to run for 45 minutes and that's it. I'm just saying like as another person or even myself, what caused you to start like going past that? You went to like an hour and then you would start to realize like what would have happened, I guess, if you never experienced that.
I know. I wonder, like I wouldn't have seen the world like I have seen it if I didn't push past that limit, right? I think part of it was that I had set a goal. I had set a goal to run like my first marathon, and it was like, okay, well, I'm signed up for this and I'm committed to doing this. Like I'm going to see it. But then I quickly started to acknowledge how, like anything up to 10K, those were my least favorite runs. And I think keeping a journal, like as I was training, I think was really important because I was able to reflect on that. My shorter runs were the ones that weren't feeling very good. And it was my longer runs that I was able to find that rhythm and just find a nice rhythm I could stay in for a while. Right.
Something I'd like to talk about, because it's the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about these extreme, things, pushing yourself both mentally and physically beyond what you think you can do. Obviously you can, because you've done it, right? But most people, and I think anybody, we get to a point where we're just like, that's it, right? Like I can't do anymore. And even even me running, I'm not an avid runner, but when I go, I'm like, oh, I can't do anymore. And then you go however many more kilometers, right? Especially what comes to mind is the one in the heat, like ridiculous, the Death Valley, right? Like I just recently saw a video and the guys were just trying to like spend some time in there and it's just ridiculously hot. I'm like, how are you doing exercise? So the question is, after all of that, how do you deal with that, mentally pushing yourself past that, or if you feel like you physically are just done, how do you deal with that?
Okay, well, there is this really great quote. I don't know who said it, but it's famous in the ultra running community. And it's that like ultra events are 90% mental and the other 10% is in your head.
Wow. That's good though.
So it's right. It's like, and so it's true. Like of course there's the physical aspect, and training for something like that Death Valley race was a lot of specific training. Like I trained in Saskatchewan, and throughout, like starting in February, I was training for that race from February to July, like very focused training in the middle of Saskatchewan winter. And but if you really think about it, there is nothing that's going to really prepare you very much for those conditions in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
But I believe you are training your brain so much for just building confidence in your skills, in your ability, in your body,
Wow.
that you just get to know yourself so well. I've tried to explain that to people, like, because I didn't start running until I was 25. I was not physically active at all until I was about 25. So I have this line in the sand that I could basically draw and say before and after.
Mm-hmm.
And I it's kind of taboo to say during COVID, but if I was ever feeling a cold coming on, like I knew things like so quickly because I just know myself inside and out. I'm like, when I'm running an ultra, I'm constantly doing this mental checklist.
Yeah.
So if it's very rare where you talked about something physical happening that could be drastic, you're just so aware of it before it even becomes a thing. Right. Because
you take care of it before it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's actually something they say all the time with that race in particular, because you're so isolated from getting help. Same with the Sahara. You're so isolated from getting help. It's like you need to stay on top of anything physical, and just constantly be checking in with everything in your body and coming up with and that's another reason I love these challenges, is like you're constantly problem solving. It's like, okay, I feel this. What can I do to make sure this doesn't become something that's going to stop this?
And the whole mental thing you said, that quote is, I think it's awesome, because it's a big thing that I try to think about or focus on is you can do whatever you want, right? Like with your mind, you can quite literally do whatever you want. And people say it all the time, and you hear it and you're like, oh, whatever, you can do anything you put your mind to. But quite literally you can, and I mean, you're proof of that you can, anybody. And I'm sure, I'll let you say, but you would probably just consider yourself just an average person, that you're no different than anybody else, right?
Totally.
Except that you've now completed these things and you can talk about it. But yeah, and how have you noticed that any of this stuff that you're working on when you're doing the races, how it's affected your just day-to-day life?
Yeah, I mean, another good example of just a moment that really put things into perspective from me, when I was coming back from that race in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And you, every leaf you stepped on as you were running, you had to be so careful because there are so many poisonous snakes.
Oh.
And that was a huge concern, right?
Yeah.
And then you were camping under these volcanoes. I remember one night, the sky was so bright red because the lava was shining onto the clouds in the sky.
Oh, wow.
And it was spewing rocks. It was actually spewing rocks out of the volcano. So you'd hear these rocks ricocheting off of trees or the hillside that you were camping on the side of, right? Yeah. And everything was just even if you get a scratch, your body after so many days is focusing so much on just recovering your major muscles and your lungs and your heart that your scratches won't heal. You have to be really careful of infections. So it's intense in so many ways. I had this amazing experience where it's this is life altering. I can't see life the same way. And honestly, I feel like that every time I do a race. I'm or a challenge I've pushed my limits. I'm I can't see life the same way. It's going to be different now.
Yeah.
I was flying home and I got a text from a coworker, and her comment was something aren't you excited to come back to real life? All the emails, all the students, all the blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it just made me step back. I remember the moment in the airport, and I was just no. This was real life. What I just experienced was real life. All I was focused on was staying alive. All I was focused on was what is my heart rate? What's my breathing rate?
Right.
How are my muscles? Making sure I was recovering fully each night so that I could push it again the next day. And I thought that was the most real life I've ever felt at that time in my life.
Yeah.
And this office, going back to my computer and checking emails and all of these things, that's what I do to fill my time,
Yeah.
but and to keep ourselves busy as humans, but that did not feel that does not feel like real life in comparison to actually trying to stay alive through the jungle.
Wow.
Right?
That's one of the most, I have to be honest, one of the most credible things I've heard from, I've been trying to have these kind of conversations with people for quite a while. Because, well, two things. It really sounds like when you're saying you're running through the desert and running and you're worried about what you're stepping on and
Yeah.
what's happening with your body, you're completely focused on mindfulness, right?
Yes, fully.
Um,
It's like it's a meditative state
That's what I'm saying. The
in many
entire
ways.
thing, it sounds
Mhm.
like to me, right? You're so aware and you're just practicing, which most people wouldn't say. When you're meditating, you're sitting down, it's quiet and whatever. I mean, you're obviously it's hectic. You're running, you're whatever. Everything's happening in the wilderness, and but you're. I would assume. Would you say that you're like your mind is at peace, like you're calm as
Yes.
probably as calm as you can be,
And
right?
honestly, it's the happiest too. Like people
Yeah.
who have like that one race in Death Valley, you have crew. You have a crew that basically is your lifeline because they need to go get help if you need it.
Right.
All the rest of them, you're very by yourself, right? And those people like saw me throughout those 48 hours, and they were like you are the happiest. Like
Wow.
I am. Like there's moments that are obviously tough and can be stressful,
Yeah.
but I am just in this place of like just being so in touch with everything that I
Yeah.
am, right? My
Yeah.
being, right? It's pretty cool.
I was just talking with somebody about this and finding alignment, right? Is what you call that.
Yeah.
When you're I mean,
I like
fully
it.
aligned
Yeah.
with your purpose, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what you want to be. You said real life, like that's the
Yeah.
office, whatever. It doesn't really matter, and it's obviously different for everybody, right?
Yeah.
But for you, that's the thing, and being fully able to be in that for such a long period of time, because the
Yes.
thing, like you say, 6 days. Obviously, it's not the entire 6 days, but for a majority of that, you're fully in it,
Yeah.
right? How? I mean, I don't think you have the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Yeah.
How do you think other people that are finding that they don't have that sense of real life, quote unquote, real life, and what is what they want and they're aligned? How can you start to find that?
That's a really good question. I mean, like part of it is acknowledging what is making you like happy. Where do you find some peace? Where do you find that like you're getting close to something that is aligning you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I know that's tough because it could be anything, but I think it's once again it's not putting limits on yourself. Like I never
Mm,
like to be tagged as as an athlete even, right? Because then usually means I have to do everything in races, but it's
yeah.
like I can create my own challenge and still get the same. I don't need a medal at the end or a
Yeah.
trophy.
Yeah.
And so I think for people, I think it's so easy that we get caught up in that sort of that rat race of like of emails, and this is exactly like these, you have a house by this age and you have this
Right.
much in
Yeah. Yeah.
RSPs
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you have like all of these things, and people think they're going to find happiness in those things without really exploring outside of the off
Mm-hmm.
the trail, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like the road less taken. I've always loved that poem, and I always think about that, like, just being able to constantly kind of take different streams and see if they work. And so many of the things that I'll pause for a second and go back to one thing. So when I was in some type of professional development event at work, they did one of those tests where you did answered all these questions, and it came up with your like colors linked to your personality. And so many people thought that because of what I like doing extreme events, that I was a risk taker. And risk taker was like you had the red color was a risk taker.
Yeah.
And instead I was the strategic like thinker. Those were my traits. And I was like, yes, for sure I am.
Yeah.
So I was constantly like looking at what I was doing in life and being like, okay, if I do this, what really is the risk? Because I'm not a big risk taker.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I try this and I don't like it, I'm not stuck there. I could always come back,
Right.
and home is always going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these other things are going to be there.
Yeah.
And so, like that's where I try and really think of like trying to always, take the road less traveled and give it a try, because you're not going to be stuck on that road. That other road is always there. You can always come back to it.
Yeah.
But you're never going to find what really makes you happy if you keep doing things that make you unhappy.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And it's less of, you're saying being a risk taker. The way you're describing it, it's more of just like being more of an explorer to see the
Yes.
other things. And it's not really a risk because it's not like you're just stuck with that thing that you're,
Yes.
quote
Yes.
unquote taking a risk for, right?
Exactly. But so many people are, it's scary to move, right? Like to
Yeah.
move to a different city or move to a different province. That even that action holds a lot of people back, right?
Yeah.
People love the idea of like traveling, but there's a lot of things that take priority for people over traveling. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, if these things make you happy, you have to start prioritizing happy,
Yeah.
right? At some point, you have to start prioritizing that.
Wow.
And I think I could see people like in my daily life when I was going on these races, they were like, well, but you could be building in your career right now, and you could be doing this right now, and you could be doing this right now. And I'm like, yes, I could, but those things aren't making me happy right now. And I don't feel like I'm growing as much of a person in those things. Like they're not allowing me that space to grow.
Yeah. And the thing that comes up with stuff like that, when people say, focus on what you're like what makes you happy, and it's like, well, it's not going to bring me money, or that kind of stuff. Has that ever been the focus of what you're doing, or it's been, I want to do this because I like it? And the question is, if you're comfortable sharing, if it has happened, has any of that monetary value actually come back to you through sponsors or whatever? Have you gotten that through just focusing on being happy, and the rest comes, right?
Yeah. So in reality, like I've always been employed. I've always loved my job and loved my work, but I feel like I am a better employee, and I'm a better family member, and I'm a better everything in my life when I've had these challenges and these events. I come back being just a stronger person.
Wow.
Where I feel like I probably would have crumbled more if I didn't have those outlets.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, they're so therapeutic. They're so therapeutic. But in terms of, it's really hard in extreme ultra events because they're so small. Like it's a very limited amount of the population that does them. The races are small, that they're not as high profile. So it's very hard to get sponsorship.
Right.
I basically used, like, that was my travel. Like I didn't take trips where I didn't do a race or didn't do an event. Okay. Every trip I did was to do a race. So it's basically how I traveled. And how I spent my weekends was, in the summers, like every weekend I'm going somewhere to race or to do an event or to, hike a mountain or whatever.
Right.
But then because it's such a small circle, we all really get to know each other, and there are opportunities in that. Like, for example, China was putting on their very first ultramarathon, and there was a race director who I had done one of his races, and he was helping China organize this first ultramarathon, and they wanted a representative from each country to come and do their first race. So I got selected for that, and my entire trip was paid for.
Right.
And then they were like, well, you tell us when you want your plane ticket dates, and we'll make it work. So then if I'm going all the way to China and it's being paid for by someone else, I'm not going to just stay for the race and go home. So I brought a backpack and I backpacked around China for a month and just took advantage of the opportunity. So much of it is in my mind is that just taking advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah.
If I ever needed to go home, there's planes, and it was awesome. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah. And it's just, like you said, putting the focus on what you want to do. Things come out of it, and it doesn't matter. And I really like you're one of the people that perfectly exemplifies just doing what you want because you really want to do it, and not worrying about what happens or the what ifs or the buts or whatever, you know what I mean? And obviously what other people think. And like you said, you're going there for a month. If something happens, you need to come home, you come home.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and I can talk to this because I plan a lot, where it's like I want to figure out everything that's happening. So if I was going to China for a month, less so now, but a little while ago, it would have been like, okay, here's what I'm doing, here's where I'm staying, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're just like, I'll just go and we'll figure it out.
I would still have a complete itinerary. I'm such a researcher. I would do massive research, planning all of the country and where I'm going to do it, and where I'm going to see it. But I am when I travel, anyone that knows me says I travel like it's an ultra race in itself. Like I'm like, I need to see everything, and I'm going to go here for exactly like 1.5 days, and then I'm going to take like this mode of transportation, and then I'm going to get to this place and see this. Like I totally take advantage of it. But it's like I'm not someone who just shows up in like any city and goes with the flow. I'm that planner when it comes to that.
Okay.
But in terms of opportunity, I won't pass up opportunity.
I guess that's more so what I was meaning, right? Yeah, like you're gonna not worry about something, or like just see what happens. Give it a go, at least give it a shot. Yeah.
Yes.
And you can, I mean, you're not living with any regrets to that extent. Less so, I guess. I'm sure everybody has some, but what's the most, I mean, you kind of talked about one, but like incredible moment or something, realization or whatever, epiphany or something that's happened on these races because you've done so many and been through so many things that that comes to mind.
Yeah, there's been a lot. Like I said, so many. Every one I say like it changes my perspective on life. But one that was very like timely was, as I mentioned, almost every single one of these are very solo. They're very individual. And I think that's what forces me, and maybe that partly answers the other question about how does someone find these moments of alignment, is it was epic amounts of alone time. Like I would run from Regina to Lumsden in Saskatchewan, like on gravel roads by myself in the middle of winter, and you have
which is very far for anybody that doesn't know where that is.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, there and back would be about like 60, 70 kilometers.
Yeah.
But it's you're very isolated and you have no choice but to go deep, right? Yeah. Like you just have no choice. And so that makes you reflect, where I think we can very easily run on the surface in life where we don't go deep. And so I had spent so much time alone. I got into that Bad Water race, and that was like huge for me, was to get into the race. And then I knew that I needed to have a crew. It's just the rules that you needed to have a crew.
Yeah.
None of the other races do you have anybody, like it's just you. And I had become so focused on like me and my power was going to get through this, and my strengths were going to get me through this. And I kept saying like, my crew's going to be there because they have to be there, but I'm not actually going to need them. I can do this on my own. And it was such a huge life lesson I think I've always been one of those people who was like, I don't need help. I can do this on my own. I got this. Yeah. I'm strong. I'm independent. I don't need help. And it was a huge like life-turning event to actually have them be a part of this experience, because it is so like, it's so personal. It's so deep. And they witnessed all of it, even though they still say to this day, they're like, well, we saw you do it, but it's not like we knew what you were feeling. And I'm like, no, but you saw my highs, my lows, my all of this. Like it feels like they got to peer into my soul. I felt like connected to those people in a way that was just mind blowing. Plus they were like 100% like committed to help you get through this. And we had so many like ups and downs and scary moments, and like we got stuck in a sandstorm at one point, and like, you had people basically like crying for you because they were so concerned about what you were going through. And then when we finished, it felt like it was an independent thing, but it was I didn't question it at all. It was a huge team effort, and they were there to 100% help me. And it was the first time in my life that I ever felt like that, like I got to a point where I could openly 100% like accept help. And it wasn't a weakness, where in my mind accepting help was like always a weakness to me. So that just changed my relationship with people. It changed how I work with others, how I can ask for help in life in general now, where before I was just so stubborn. I was like, I could do this on my own. I don't need anyone. Like that was really how I functioned through life.
Do you think you would have gotten to that point without reaching that, like you said, spent so much time alone and really getting deep and within? Do you think you would have reached that, this feeling and that kind of, that sense of that connection that you were able to create with these other people?
Yeah, I don't think so. Like it was, I don't think I would have ever got there without that experience. Like
Wow.
it was huge. It was huge.
Yeah, that turning
Yeah.
within is quite phenomenal, and especially I mean to talk to somebody that has so much forced time alone with in
Yes.
such extreme conditions too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only a matter of time before it does something positive to your
Yes.
mind.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like that whole being alone part, like I'm not saying it's bad at all. It was so good and it's so good for me that
Mm,
honestly, like the moment now that I step out, like I love trail running. So the moment I step out on a trail, like I have so much control over my
mm,
thoughts, and I can think about stuff if I really want to. I have some of my best brainstorming
yeah.
for work and for projects and for everything, like when I'm running. So I can be brilliant, but if there's too much noise and I want to turn it off, I can be like, I just want to think about nature, take this all in and just stop thinking. I can do
Wow.
that. Like I can get to a point where I have so much mental
Mm,
control that I think that is very useful in so many parts of my life
yeah.
too, is that mental control. So I don't want to say that being solo and being like so inside your brain was a negative thing. It that didn't play a part in me having a trouble asking for help. It was more that I was just a very stubborn individual
Yeah.
from birth kind of thing, right? Where like I
Yeah.
didn't ever like asking for help even before I was a
Yeah.
runner. But it was, I was just, it sort of instilled it even further. I could do this on my own. I could do this on my own.
Right.
But I think the more time people can spend in their own head and just going to those uncomfortable places, the more they'll learn about themselves and what is going to give them more alignment in life.
Yeah. Wow. I'm wondering, do you practice or have ever practiced traditional meditation? I say traditional because what you're doing sounds very similar, but is that something that's part of your routine, your life?
I've It's come and gone in my life, and
Yeah.
I try and use like different meditation like apps, but
Right.
honestly, I find it most naturally comes like when I'm
When you're
out
out.
in nature, like
Yeah.
whether it's I'm walking dogs or like
Yeah.
running or
This is
yeah.
quite fascinating to me because I've never thought about it in this sense because I mean, I've never been in that position to that extent where I feel like that. I mean, I can personally get there through meditation from kind of what you're explaining, but never just like you're just doing an activity,
Yeah.
and it's quite phenomenal. And I think it's pretty motivational, inspirational, also like to make others, whoever's listening to this, or even myself, go try to find those things that you really want to do that really make you happy because that will come. You know what I mean? Like at a certain point, that alignment, that whatever meditative state, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
will will come. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the term alignment. It's so true. Like that's exactly like so many things, like not just like mental alignment, but like there's that physical alignment that's happening too. So it's like
Yeah.
ultimate like
It is
personal alignment.
for sure. And how do you take care? Obviously, we're talking about a lot of mental things. How do you take care of your body though?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing that I think is also sort of a myth in it, that like you're like abusing your body.
Right.
And the reason I got into running in the first place was actually like rehabbing from a car accident.
Oh.
And that was the only reason I got into running, and it was because I knew if I can strengthen so many of my muscles that it would help my joint that was injured heal and make it stronger.
Yeah.
And so that's when I really got into running. And through that, my promise to myself was that like anything I'm doing is to make myself stronger and better. Where if I at any point feel like I'm causing more injury, then like that's it. Like I'm not
Right.
I'm not. And every time I went longer or further or anything with my running, I only came out of it feeling stronger.
Huh.
And so um recovery is a huge portion of it, like especially in those stage races
Yeah.
when you race multiple days in a row. It's like the moment you stop, you are just focused on like recovering and like elevating your legs, getting into a cold river so that your legs had like cold water therapy.
Yeah.
Just everything you can think of to recover. It is so key. And honestly, like you get to that point too with your body that you're just so thankful for allowing it to like be this vehicle to see these cool things in the world that you're seeing. You're like, okay, I need this like body to last as long as possible. And honestly, I've never ever felt like I was doing any harm. I've never been injured from any of the sports that I've been doing or any of the training I've been doing. So it is, I focus on recovering like a lot to just make sure I'm not causing any injury.
Right. And you're so focused and aware of what your body's doing that like there's some people, athletes, I would say, others that like they just would push themselves, to do more. It's like push yourself, do more, do more, do more. But you're so aware of what's going on that you haven't injured yourself, probably because you know it was going to happen and you prevented it before it even happened.
Yeah. And it's true. And the other thing is that, there's a big difference between sprinting a 5K and running 500 miles.
Yep.
Because, like you're trying to find like that pace that your body can maintain for as long as possible. And so if you push it too hard, then it will just come to a breaking point.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly just knowing and watching like the zones, your heart rate zones, to just make sure you're not going crazy. So it might be a turtle pace to someone that's running sprinting a 5K. But you can last a lot longer going at that slower pace.
Yeah,
and I think that's important too. So many people like don't get into running or don't get into physical activity, especially as adults, because they think like you're only good if you're fast. And I have never been interested about being fast. Like I'm more interested in where it can get me in the world and what I can see and, than like
and enjoying the experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I really don't care about how long it takes me.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. And I mean, that's how we should approach it. Unless you're like, you're in the Olympics, you probably should focus on that. But you had mentioned the other challenges. You said it's not always just races that you're doing these extreme things. You create challenges in your life. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So most of them they're all physical as well. I was doing some work in like a research project that was taking place in Africa. So I was going to Africa for work anyways. And I'm like, well, I want to climb like Mount Kilimanjaro, but I want to do it on the fastest route. So the fastest meaning like it's just the most uphill. It's actually the route that they use for emergencies because they can get people down faster, right away. And only like one company will actually like take people up that route. And you have to basically submit like a list of accomplishments and things like that they'll trust taking you up there. And so I wanted to do that in 3 days and then come back down and then do Mount Kenya, which is the second highest mountain, and it's supposed to be more technical. So I did back-to-back like Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya in the span of 5-6 days.
Yeah.
And then like last year, just before, well, I guess it was in October last year, so almost a year ago, I was going to Nepal to actually do some work with a group of Nepalese mountain bikers. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to Nepal, like I have to go to base camp. So just set a goal of like, climbing to base camp and just doing some other climbing in and around that area. So constantly just trying to find things that I want to do, challenges I want to set. Like I said, doesn't need to have a trophy at the end, like, just any sort of physical things that way. I think I've always been kind of like that though. Like when I was in university, I wanted to have like 2 degrees by 22. And like, I just always set like these, these
That's what I was gonna
goals.
say. Like in your personal life, or do you notice yourself doing that? Like even at home, just with little things.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, but I mean, it all strengthens that the things you're working on with your mind and everything. Anyway.
Yes, but what's interesting about that, and with people, I've had a couple different like coaches who have worked with me, and they think, oh well, like that's your competitiveness, and then they get to know me, and they're like, oh wow, like I am the least competitive person you will have ever met. Like I don't have a competitive like bone in my body. And so they're like, everything you're turning these into challenges, they're all very like, I'm very intrinsically motivated. Like it amazes a lot of the coaches that I've worked with because they're like, oh, like they're trying to look at these extrinsic factors and be like, oh, this, and it really doesn't even go on my radar. Like, wow. And actually, if there is competition, I'm a lot less interested in things. Like I'm like, that's not really my thing. Like,
you're in it for the, like I said, like the experience and the growth or whatever that will come from it. Yeah. You have so much to talk about. This is incredible. No, this is great. Before we wrap it up, is there anything based on all this experience you've had that you would like to share, or advice, or whatever that you'd like to say while you're on here?
Oh, it's so tough because I'd like to say, oh, I have so much. But at the same time, I'm just kind of like, I also feel like I don't have a lot because my personal journey might be so different than someone else's, like someone else's journey. But I guess like one thing that, we touched on is just like get to know yourself, spend lots of time with yourself in not necessarily comfortable situations, like in some uncomfortable situations,
right,
so that you get to like explore some of your limits and some of your challenges. A big thing that I firmly believe in is that we're capable of so much more than we think we are. And if I ever put limits on myself, I don't think I would have experienced even probably 3/4 of what I've experienced in my life if I put those limits. And so don't get squared into this box. Just find some things that are different for you, where you get to spend time with yourself, get into it, start paying attention to what you're liking, what you're not liking, and push past some of those limits too, and explore, challenge.
Yeah, you say that you don't think it'll apply to other people, but I actually think it's incredibly versatile, because it doesn't matter what the situation is. If you're running in the Sahara Desert, or if you're I don't know, doing something in an office somewhere, you can acquire or work on that mindset, or thinking that way no matter what. And it's great to hear it from someone like you.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you're interested in more content like this, go check out our website at don'tsettleofficial.ca. We're dedicated to providing resources, information, and content designed to assist you on your journey of personal growth, and most of all, to help you live life to the fullest. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll chat with you next time.